Clearly, we will share the recording as well as the presentations that will be showed today. I'd like to remind you that on behalf of the Clean Air for Ukraine program and Arnica NGO, we invited you to today's event that is dedicated to environmental crimes and accountability mechanisms. Today, we will present a publication that is dedicated to the same topic. And it will also cover building an efficient environmental inspection, and we will look at the Czech example. So this publication covers adaptation to the European standards, tackling corruptions, and engagement of civil society organizations. Once again, for those who have just joined us, I'd like to remind you that in the chat box, you can find an explanation of how you can enable interpretation. To do that, you have to pick the Ukrainian language channel by clicking the globe icon or three dots if you are using a mobile device, and you can also mute original audio and listen to interpretation exclusively so that the two languages do not overlap. In case if there are any technical issues, please send us a message in the chat box. And to open our event, I'd like to give the floor to Marcela Chernokhova, and she's the coordinator of Clean Air for Ukraine and a representative of Arnica from the Czech Republic. Over to you.
Hello, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings from Prague. I'm really delighted that I can welcome you on behalf of Arnica and program Clean Air for Ukraine. As some of you know, Arnica is a Czech non-governmental organization, and we have been active in Ukraine since 2017. We run a long-term campaign, which is called Clean Air for Ukraine. And I would like to thank the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Czech Development Agency for their long-term support. Our work is focused on industrial air pollution, environmental war damages, and the post-war recovery. This year we started a project called Green Reconstruction, and the main goal is to support the sustainable recovery of the war-affected regions in Ukraine. You can find more information about our work on our website. And today we will talk about a crucial institution in environmental protection. We will talk about the Environmental Inspectorate. Together with my colleagues, we prepared a publication summarizing the most important milestones of the process of establishing and developing the Czech Environmental Inspectorate. You can download the publication on the website of the Clean Air for Ukraine. And we would like to open a discussion about the role and form of the Environmental Inspectorate in Ukraine. This is why we have today two speakers with us, Czech and Ukrainian. First, we will share with you the story of the Czech Environmental Inspectorate. We have a great speaker, Jan Plesnik. He has been working in nature conservation for several decades and witnessed the transformation of our country from the communist regime into European Union, which of course significantly influence also the sector of nature conservation. The journey of our Environmental Inspectorate has not been easy, and we want to share with you at least some of the ups, but also downs, as we believe that the Czech Republic and Ukraine are countries which have a lot in common and can learn from each other. Then our second speaker, Oleksandr Skakalsky, will share with you some of his views and thoughts on the Ukrainian State Environmental Inspectorate. Oleksandr has experience of the state environmental administration, but also of being actively involved as the senior inspector. And of course, there will be some space for your comments and questions, and so we can have some discussion about this topic. I think there is no doubt that well-functioning, independent environmental inspectorate is a crucial precondition for successful and efficient protection of environment. So I'm looking very much to our discussion and on this relevant topic. So enjoy the presentation. Thank you for your attention. Slava Ukraini.
Glory to the heroes. And now I would like to give the floor to Jan Plesnik, who has already been mentioned by Marcela, who works for the Environment Protection Agency in the Czech Republic, and he will be sharing the experience of the Czech Republic when it comes to the Environmental Inspectorate. So over to you, Jan. The floor is yours, Jan. We could hear Dmitro. Could you please mute your microphone? No, we cannot see it. We cannot see your presentation. No, people are saying in the chat box that they cannot see your presentation. Still that. We still cannot see it.
Там потрібно share нажати, натиснути зелененька стрілочка і звідти поділитися.
А організатору Zoom надав дозвіл на демонстрацію екрана інший?
Так. Ну, ми ж бачимо зараз його екран.
Now?
Да, бачимо, пане Ян.
Perfect.
Да, бачимо.
So, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, friends, it really is a great honor and pleasure for me to share with you with establishing and running the institution which is on charge of environmental enforcement. And I would like at the beginning to express that we are not going to be a teacher, but our intention is to really share the experience with you and also to learn from you. I guess that I'm very much looking forward to bilateral exchange of experience, views, and also ideas how to proceed further with a very important part of the environmental protection, which environmental law enforcement in the fact is. And special thanks to colleagues from Arnica to allow me to be with you, although for a long distance, but to try to share with you the experience with the Czech Environmental Inspectorate development or phylogenesis, I could say. My name is Jan Plesnik. I'm with the Nature Conservation Agency of the Czech Republic. I've been involved in environmental protection issues at the national, EU, pan-European and global level, among others, for example, chairing the scientific body of the Convention on Biological Diversity or European Topic Center on Biological Diversity, and so on. Our Nature Conservation Agency is, when comparing the nature conservation agencies across Europe a hybrid, because we are at the same time the scientific or technical or expert body to the Ministry of the Environment, but also through our regional branches, we are performing state or public administration in nature conservation within protected landscape areas covering 15% of the country. That means that we are at the same time expert body, but also having the possibility to perform nature conservation in the field. And let me start with the sentence which could open the presentation. And this is the idea: when always, if you will come with a new idea, there are some phases of the process. And these are 4 stages. If you will come with a new idea, for example, to establish the environmental law enforcement authority, always coming with a new idea, the first response from most people is that this is a worthless nonsense. The second stage is that then you are taught that this is an interesting but perverse point of view. But meantime, there is a development of your idea, and then you can recognize from your colleagues that this is true, but quite unimportant. And at the end, you are taught from them that they always said so. This is the idea which was expressed, and I like it, this quotation, because it was expressed by John Haldane, who was a founder of British and an Indian scientist. And he's considered to be a founder of 2 scientific disciplinary branches: population genetics and evolutionary biology. And why also the environmental law enforcement is so important? Because we are really living in the time of very strong changes in the environment, in the human society, and generally on the globe. And therefore I put there, this is the cover page from the famous journal The Economist, and it was said that when reality is changing faster than theory suggests, it should a certain amount of nervousness is a reasonable response. And this is because you know that now, since the early 1950s, we have been living in the period of the development of human civilization, or generally the planet, which is called Great Acceleration. And one of the characteristic of Great Acceleration is globalization. But you know, and apologize for saying this, because this is a platitude, that really we have been facing more and more environmental crisis, which is really a global coverage and global character. Those who are expecting that we are going to speak about this probably will be disappointed, because our intention is first to setting the scene. That means to come with some terms which I'm going to use during the presentation. Then I would like to present to you a very brief Government and Environmental Protection Authorities taxonomy. That means to put the environmental protection enforcement within the environmental sector. Then I prepared some very brief information how enforcement authorities are organized across the world, with some exception to and with some let me say more detailed information about some examples, and also what was said by my colleague Marcela Chernokhova, very brief information about the Czech Environmental Inspectorate past and present, because you can find more details in the publication having been just mentioned by Marcela. And then probably the most important part of today's presentation is very small attempt to come with SWOT analysis of the Czech models. That means which are pros and cons of the model we have applied in my country. And at the very end, I would like to present to you some gentle recommendation based really on our experience, not something from blue sky, but really based on the experience with more than 30 years history and development of the Czech Environment Inspectorate. And apologize for saying the platitude. Let me start the fact that environmental protection is a range of human activities aiming at maintaining the environment in a favorable status. That means in good conditions, particularly healthy for a long time. I'm presenting this because sometimes environmental protection is considered to be a science. This is not the case because science is environmental science or plural sciences, but also sometimes it is considered to be something where only the government is in charge of, or vice versa. For some people, unfortunately, this is considered to be something which is presented by some crazy activist or so on. But generally, this is a really a range of human activities. And you can see that we are speaking about healthy environment. That means that there is some movement in the philosophy of the environment protection, and we are in the fact using the same terminology as human medicine. We are not speaking about stable or good environment, but we are trying to present to the general public and to the target groups environment as a healthy issue. And what is very important is that this should be for a long time. That means that the main aim of all dealing with the environment is really to have healthy environment for a long time. I don't like presentation where pictures are taken or downloaded from the internet. So I was seeking in my archive, and I will present you some photos. This is from the very first UNESCO World Heritage Site in the Czech Republic, because we have got 70 culture UNESCO World Heritage sites. That means because we are really a country with a very rich history, culture history, but only 3 years ago we were successful, and this is from the Jezera Mountains beech forest, which is close to the border with Poland in the northern part of the country, and this is a part of the multilateral UNESCO World Heritage Site, where also Carpathians beech forest, very beautiful and really magnificent beech forests from Western Ukraine are also involved. And let me say what is nature, and again apologize this because, but we would like to really setting the scene, and the most respected definition of nature is that it is a real world surrounding us, but the world which was not created by humans, but humans critically depend on it. It is the definition which was for the first time presented at the famous the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment, which was held in late May and early June 1972 in Stockholm, and it was the very first meeting in the history of human civilization dealing at a very high level as well as with a strong scientific background on the environment, because at the time it was recognized that something is wrong globally with the environment. And the photo here, this is one of the so-called new modern wonders of nature, waterfall Iguazu on the border between Brazil and Argentina. It is unbelievable because there are from 150 to 30 waterfalls. You can hear them for some kilometers being in front of them. The height of some of them is 90 meters, and they are the biggest waterfall in the world. And I'm showing this because I took this photo in April, and now image the situation. In July, there was no single drop of water because there were only rocks. It is unbelievable how it was possible that so huge, really huge amount of water totally disappeared. And we know that it is very clear because it was really once a century drought in Brazil, probably with high probability caused by climate change. And we are also dealing with the landscape, and the landscape is an air cover consisting of natural elements and man-made products. That means that we have nature as a very specific part of our environment, and then the landscape, which also consists of natural elements but also man-made products. There is a photo of very ordinary field road, and this, you know, that this is still debate in some EU member states, because in some countries like in the Czech Republic, there is a tradition to have a possibility to walk freely through the landscape. But for example, in the United Kingdom or in Denmark, there is something like that most landscape is fenced because private lands. And now, for example, when we were preparing the European Landscape Convention, some countries were not able to join it because one of the preconditions of this international law was try to keep the landscape free for walking of people, but also for movement of wildlife. That means animals and also plants. And again, this was taken from the documents from Stockholm. And the last, what I would like to, let me say, setting is the environment. And you know that the environment is a part of the world which influence humans and which is vice versa influenced by humans. That means we have nature, then we have landscape, and then we have the environment, because, for example, the environment also includes indoor. And of course, the human use and affect the environment, but at the same time, they have been adapting themselves to it. This is, I apologize because sometimes I forgot that I'm not teaching at the university, but I would like to stress the fact that we should really take into account that in some countries there are authorities dealing with enforcing law for nature conservation, landscape protection, and environment protection separately. And environment protection and management is a multidisciplinary social branch trying to keep the environment healthy. So again, that means that this is very important to saying that environment protection is not science. It is not something which is a hobby for some activist, but this is really a social branch, a branch of the human activity, trying to keep the environment healthy. The photo I took, it is from the Kafue National Park in Zambia. It was during the very late afternoon, and we were really lucky to find this big herd of impala antelope. These are females with the young. It was more than 100 herd, but unfortunately, you know, those who have visited Africa, that you can see these scenes only in the national park, because the really population tsunami in Africa. And again, let me stress the fact, and apologize again to stressing this. We should always say, because this is totally correct, that environmental protection is it is a strong public interest. We are not doing environment protection only because we like it, but because this is really a strong public interest. And environment protection management is based on 6 instruments. That means that we should have 6 instruments to perform or to carry out environment protection. First is legal regulation. And during my presentation, I will pay more attention to the legal regulation dealing with the environmental law enforcement. Then we need to have some economic tools, which are, for example, fees, if you are breaking the law, but also subventions. That means to motivate people to do something for the environment, which is not their duty because of law. That means, simply say, to pay for the activities which are not directly part of the law, but something which is the activity going behind the law. And you know that the Czech Republic, and we are very proud of it, was the very first post-communist country where the Ministry of the Environment established a subvention or a subsidy program in 1993, dealing and paying for, and at the time it was program called water system restoration, because we lost 1/3 of our river network in the 20th century because of river canalization and so on. But these tools are very important, because you know that money speaks very strongly. Then what we need is science, research, monitoring, surveys or inventories, and innovation. Because this is not a platitude, but it should be our strong intention. Our activity should be based on evidence provided by science, something which is called, apologize because this is almost a buzzword, which is called evidence-based environmental protection. Then we need communication, education, and public awareness. Within the United Nations, we introduced the abbreviation CEPA, that means communication with, education of, and raising awareness among the general public and the target groups like children, farmers, hunters, and so on. And of course, now we have reached the practical measures in the field. And environmental protection, all of us, or most often, try to combine all these 6 instruments according to the conditions. And we have also some types of governmental bodies within the environmental sector. First, it is called executive. That means these are authorities performing state or public administration in the environment protection. Then We have also scientific or expert authorities which try to advise the executive authorities based on scientific evidence or data provided by monitoring of some elements of the environment or so on. And then now we are what is the main topic of today's presentation, and this is law enforcement and checking. And very important part is, and there are also for example, in my country also, there is a specific institution under Ministry of the Environment dealing only with information and data management. That means data gathering, but it would be not enough. Data analyzing, data storing, and data distributing. That means that generally there are 4 types of governmental bodies dealing with the environmental sector. And now we reach how the enforcement authorities are organized in the world. In some countries, these authorities are directly under the Ministry of Justice or the Ministry of the Interior. That means that they are not a part of the environment protection sector. The second possibility is that, and this is the most often, is that the environment enforcement authorities are under the Ministry of the Environment or any other appropriate sector in charge of environmental protection. Because you know that in some countries, for example, like Austria, there are environmental protection issues carried out by ministry which is also in charge of other sectors like agriculture or land use planning or so on. And of course, probably the best way is if the enforcement authorities are in the fact so-called non-departmental or statutory body. What does it mean? That means that they are not part of any ministry. That they are really not a part of any ministry. That means that they are outside the ministry. And even more, for example, some of them in the UK, they check the activities of the government. That means that they are really totally independent. And the wording statutory bodies means that these authorities are able to issue some parts of law, like decrees, regulation, and so on. That means that this is very much traditional in the United Kingdom, and also so-called the Environment Agency, which is in the fact the environmental law enforcement in the UK, was established as it has been still non-departmental and statutory body, but there was a change because at the beginning this agency was paid not from the budget of the DEFRA, that means Department of the Environment and Rural Affairs, but from the very specific line in this state budget. And this is very important, and I'm going to elaborate this later on. But again, this is an ideal situation because simply said, this body should not be cancelled by the decision of the government. This is really a public part of the life in the country, for example, and this is at the same level like, for example, police. Yeah, that means that this is probably the best model, but to be honest, this is for, at least for this part of the world, something like more like ideal. And I'm going now to share with you how the Environmental Law Enforcement Authority is organized most often, and this is that there is a distribution of power or task among various bodies. And what you can see here is this is in the United States, where there is a very specific institution. This is the photo from the headquarters in Washington, D.C. And this is so-called U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, which is very important body, because you know that in the United States there is no Ministry or Department of the Environment, but the agency is a combination of executive, technical, and research. They have more than 1,000 scientists employed, and also in charge of legal enforcement and information or data management authority. And it was established only in 1970. That means quite late when comparing, for example, U.S. National Park Service or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or U.S. Forest Service, but having approximately 70,000 staff. And with respect of the, for example, data gathering and analyzing, you know that there is something that at this moment the United Nations recognize so-called triple crisis in the environment. Triple crisis as a global phenomena, and this is crisis caused by the climate change, biodiversity decline, and contamination of the environment. And image the situation, because contamination of the environment is something which is not so well known to the general public. And image the situation then in year 1960, there were 1 million chemical substances known. Now it is 220 million chemical substances. And of them, we have been using 350,000 and 100,000 very often. But the problem is that from this 100,000 chemical substances we are commonly used, we have the information about their impact on human health and the environment only for 4,000 or 5,000. That means that, to be honest, we are living in the world, we are surrounded by the chemical substances having no knowledge about them. This is really ticking bomb, and this is not so well known among the general public how dangerous it could be. And I'm speaking about this because when I visited the US EPA, they showed to us really the best data bank on these chemical substances, but still having data only on 4,000. And there is also in the United States the other environmental law enforcement authority, and this is U.S. National Park Service. And those who visited the U.S. national parks, you know that they are rangers. And the U.S. National Park Service was established in 1916, and before the, let me say, management of the national parks, because you know that the very first national park, the Yellowstone National Park in the US, was established in 1871, and the management was carried by US Army. And you know that the rangers are very powerful persons in the US society. They have almost the same competencies and the same power like police, but of course only within the national parks. But you can see that there are more staff in the US National Park Service than in the US EPA. But what is very important is that really there is almost 250,000 volunteers helping the US National Park Service with managing the national park or protecting or conserving. And the photo, there is the deer, which is called elk in American English, but in British English it would be red deer, wapiti. And I took a photo, and just next minute there was a really big, I have never seen so big brown bear. It was a grizzly female preying on and killing this deer, and there were two nice cubs, and they were like my daughters. One was very disciplined with the mother, but the other was very hyperactive, climbing on the trees, and beer mother had to come and bring it back to the ground or so on. But really, Yellowstone National Park now is facing the problem because this is really overloaded by tourists, although having more than 900,000 square kilometers. But still, and you know that there is no chance to limit the number of visitors, because according to the US Constitution, every US citizen has the right to enter the federal lands, which is of course also national park. And now we are reached the Czech Environment Inspectorate, which was established by the Act. This is very important, that it was not established by the decision of the Minister of the Environment, but by the Act. That means by the decision of the Parliament, and this is state or public administration authority. That means this is not advisory body, but really performing state or public administration in the environmental law enforcement. But contrary to the situation in the United Kingdom I have mentioned, or in the US EPA, I would like only to mention the fact that US EPA now probably will be facing some reduction because new US president, and you know that the US EPA has really some very strong competencies in the environmental protection, and the director of the US EPA is not a secretary. That means he or she is not a minister, but it is a member of the US government. And in the Czech Republic, the Czech Environmental Inspectorate is subordinated by law to the Ministry of the Environment of the Czech, which has some pros, but also some cons, as I'm going to deal next. Which are the Czech Environmental Inspectorate field of activities? First is air quality, because you know, and I apologize for repeating it, but air quality is at this moment the most serious problem in the environmental protection, not only in the European Union, but in Europe. For example, you know that there are approximately 300,000 of deaths because of the aerosol particulate matters, because there is strong correlation between the concentration of the particulate matters or aerosols and the frequency of cancer. And this is really a huge problem because of not only industrial emissions, but also, for example, emissions from our cars or so on. Then the CEI is also dealing with the water management, very important waste management, nature conservation, including implementation of the CITES, Convention on International Trade with the Endangered Species. That means fighting against the wildlife crime. And last but not at least, forest protection, conservation, and management. These are 5 main fields of activities, very strongly setting in the law. And the structure, the organogram of the Czech Environment Inspectorate follow these topics, both in headquarters in Prague, but very important issue is also being, when comparing with Ukraine, small country, but there are 10 regional branches of the Czech Environmental Inspectorate and also 2 other branches. That means that these branches are distributed across the whole country, which is really quite good advantage to be very short at the site where some problems has appeared. And now I would like to reach the SWOT analysis and to say what we see as a strength of our model. First is that we are acting with the environmental sector, thus with this respect avoiding the sector barrierism. That means that we as the Nature Conservation Agency, we have very close relation to the Czech Environmental Inspectorate because we are in the same sector. If this inspectorate will be under Ministry of Agriculture or in our country under the Ministry of the Regional Development, it would be for us much more complicated because we have been still suffering from the sector barrierism. That means that each ministry is dealing in their niche, and they are sometimes very reluctant to cooperate with the other ministries. And also, as I mentioned, national-wide coverage. That means that although there is headquarters in Prague, there are these 12 branches of the inspectorate. That means that these people there, the inspectors in the regional branches, are very close to the issues. They know the local or regional problems and also key players, lobbyists, developers, and so on. But at the same time, they are able to establish some connection with the with the civil society. Very important issue. And also, now with respect of the housekeeping issue and speaking about environmental enforcement institution, is that the revenues of fine, that means the money gathered because of penalties and fines because of breaking the law, are gathered in the State Environmental Fund of the Czech Republic, which is very important because they are not directly to the state budget. They are on the account of the State Environmental Fund of the Czech Republic. And what is very important is that this is fund. That means if there is some fine collected from some factory or some private firm or from some natural person, this is really put to the fund, and it is not necessary to be spent by the end of the appropriate year. It can be kept for 1, 2, 3 or more years, and this is not going to the state budget, but this is going for the environmental protection issues. But at the same time, this is a very important issue, that the Czech Environmental Inspectorate is not paid from or funded from the fines, because at the beginning there was, let me say, 30 years ago, it was that some of these fines collected by the Czech Environment Inspectorate were used for the operation or for the salary of the staff, and it was highly criticized, and it was changed because the ordinary people, in the best sense of the word, ordinary people then said, you are really making harm with respect of environmental protection enforcement, because more fines means more money for you. But at this moment, or let me say, since the beginning of the new millennia, it is not the case. The next, what are the weaknesses of the Czech Environment Inspectorate is that still it is funded through the Ministry of the Environment. This is something which is a really weakness, because if the ministry or the bosses at the ministry will decide to reduce the power of the Czech Environmental Inspectorate, they usually do it not by changing the law, but reducing the funds available for the authority. And for example, very recently, there was a transfer of some competencies from the Czech Environmental Inspectorate to other authorities, because now the Czech Environmental Inspectorate has not been anymore in charge of checking felling of trees growing outside the forest. We have a very specific category in our legislation, which are trees on private parcels or plots. And also it has not been more checking some forest management measures. And the explanation was that there are too many duties for the Czech Environmental Inspectorate, and the Czech Environment Inspectorate therefore had to choose among its priorities. That means there was no change in the legislation, but simply reducing the funds available. Which are the opportunities? And this is very important task that Czech Environmental Inspectorate should be considered as a real state public administration authority. That means not a sectoral body under the Ministry of the Environment. Simply said, we should always say that this is what the Inspectorate has been performing is the public interest. This is not the interest of the sector of the environment protection, but really public interest. And this is the opportunities, because all of us, when there is some body dealing with enforcement, generally this is really a problem for some people. And which are the threats? As I mentioned, director of the Czech Environmental Inspectorate is appointed by the minister, not by the board consisting of broadly respected citizens, nominated by the public or directly by the parliament. Because, for example, you know that we have as a so-called public body also, for example, Czech television or Czech broadcasting radio station. And their directors are appointed by the board, which consists of broadly respected citizens nominated by the public. And there are some public authorities where the director is appointed directly by the parliament. But unfortunately, this is not the case of the Czech Environmental Inspectorate. And therefore, if you will see the list of the directors of the Czech Environmental Inspectorate, this is really a long list. It is almost like shopping list when comparing the other bodies under the Ministry of the Environment, including our agency. That means that there is unfortunately a huge rotation of directors of this distinguished body because of new minister or new political parties in power or so on. And also, as I mentioned, that usually when there is the attempt to reduce the power of the Czech Environmental Inspectorate, it is not done by the changing of the law, because probably it would not be accepted by the voters, but by reducing operational finances or staff. And therefore, I'm now at the very end of my presentation, and I would like to come with some gentle recommendations based on our experience. First, adopt a robust legislation to cover the activities of the inspectorate and provide it with a strong mandate. And ideally, the inspectorate should be a financially and organizationally fully independent body. That means you need a strong legislation. Then define clearly the competencies and right of an inspector and the whole inspectorate in the respective law. It is really essential for inspectors to have a right to access private premises without prior notice, right to suspend or at least restrict a harmful activity, for example, some production in some factory or some contamination of water by a farmer, or to close the enterprise violating the law, not waiting for the decision of the court. This is of the court. You know that this is, for example, a very strong power for the US EPA. In the Czech Republic, the inspectorate can do it, but they should have a first something which is called a preliminary measure. But the preliminary measure is issued by a judge. That means that in the US, the staff of the US EPA can simply come and close the factory. And only then, for example, the owner can appeal to the court. And now, only as a, let me say, interesting issue, it is not so well known, but if you will be seeking which country closed the highest number of factories because damaging of nature landscape and the environment, surprisingly, in the last decade, always it was China. And next recommendation is to provide the inspectorate by regular financing, because the budget should cover adequate salaries, operation of its own vehicle fleet, purchase and operation of technological equipment such as mobile laboratories, drones, molecular biology, biotechnology, or forensic techniques. That means that is not only necessary to have people, but the people should have condition to carry out their duties. And also protect the inspectorate against corruption by training of inspectors or by the having a special telephone line and so on, and namely having a salary enough, because we have even some scandal when some inspectors were involved in the breaking of law because they were overpaid by some developer or so on. The next recommendation is to recruit and employ experts from various branches of knowledge, including lawyers. And this is the problem in my country, because lawyers are highly paid, psychologists, and also specialists in IT, because the Czech Environment Inspectorate is one of the government authority which is most often attacked by hackers, but also those experts dealing with public relations and marketing, so that the inspectorate can keep pace with the private companies. Also, there are many advantages in establishing regional branches. Not something to really to come with the decentralization of the environmental protection law enforcement. And cooperation with the general public and the target group is very important because it helps to reveal damage or threat to the environment which could be hidden. Also, the staff should be public persons protected against violence similar to policemen or police officer or judges. You know that, for example, in my country, the Czech Environmental Inspectorate staff is not armed. They have no guns, contrary, for example, to the US EPA or so on. And even we have a special staff, and namely volunteers, both in national parks as well in protected landscape areas, which are called nature guards. And we had to change the law because they have been recently so many attacked by, for example, by rich people coming to national park on their heavy cars and destroying the best sites, best habitats, and so on. And therefore, if these persons are considered to be public persons, if there is a punishment to the people attacking these persons, it is said that means similar to attack policemen or so on. And of course, keeping transparency and support law violation prevention is essential. And very important, the fines have to be quite high to deter from law violation. And we have been trying to do it in my country. That means all of us, the amount of money gathered because of fines for violating the environmental law is some billions of Czech crowns. Yeah, even if there was economic crisis, because these fines should be really high to avoid the people to break the law. And as I mentioned, there should be accumulated on specific bank account, not sent directly to the state budget when they will disappear, but invested back into measures to protect the environment. And also about communication, education and public awareness and marketing, we have been speaking a lot. But once I attended the dinner with the famous British filmmaker and publicist on the environment, Attenborough, and he said to us, the best way how to reach the general public and the target group is to come with the strong iron logic supported by space of emotion, but avoid permanent alarming. If you will be saying that everything is wrong with the environment each day, people will be resist. People will become resist. And again, we should have also the feedback from the general public on the target groups about the environmental law enforcement, and also try to employ high technology, including artificial intelligence. For example, it is even in Africa, it is used that if you are able to record the sites where the wildlife was poached, then artificial intelligence can come with the idea where there will be next poaching or so on, and avoid private sponsoring, because sometimes the Czech Environment Inspectorate is approached by a private person saying you are suffering because of lack of money, and you have no some instrument, and I will buy it for you. And of course, this is not because of being philanthrop. It is because always some interest. And also seek for partners, supporters, and alliances, breaking splendid isolation. really to say every day we are doing a public interest, and which are the possibilities that can be used in the course of the EU accession process. I'm sure that during the accession process of Ukraine to the European Union, there will be possibility to enhance and understaff authorities. For example, in the Czech Republic, one of the very strong comments from the European Commission during one hearing about our preparation for the joining the EU was, you have strongly understaffed Czech Environment Inspectorate. And the Commission even said, you should recruit some dozens of new persons. For us, it was from one side, from one hand, good because there were more staff to the inspectorate, but on the other hand, how to recruit 50 high quality persons once in a moment, so on. But definitely, I'm sure that it was even in the case of some countries where the environmental protection is quite developed, but the Commission will really look very carefully how many staff is dealing in Ukraine with the environment law enforcement. Then, of course, enhancing the appropriate legislation, including crime law. For example, we very dramatically changed the civil code because before joining the EU, for example, when there was some breeder or keeper breeding or keeping some protected plant or animal, it was not possible to Czech Environmental Inspectorate to enter his or her home. So we had to wait when, for example, they come to the exhibition or so on with the wildlife. But it had to be changed. You know that this is very strong in the United States. In the United States, if you are robbing a bank, the crime will be in charge of a local sheriff. But if you will be destroying environment, it is really a so-called federal crime. It is, and you know that US EPA has a really a style of work, like for example, anti-narcotic authorities. They have some people which are diving for some years under the changing identity, and only then, for example, coming with a very strong, powerful, let me say, intervention to those breaking law in the environment, or so on. And strengthening international cooperation, because this is very important. The environment does not respect geopolitical border. For example, in the Czech Republic, we had been suffering with the very specific situation that some private companies in Austria, namely Germany, but also in France, really officially destroy the waste, but in the fact they exported it to the Czech Republic. Yeah, and they got a lot of money from German or Austrian government, and then ask some person, they establish a fake companies and simply distributed the waste in nature. But in collaboration with the German authorities and Austrian authorities, it was possible not to finish this operation, but at least to strongly reduce them. And also learning both best practices and lesson learned, and namely also to seek why the environmental enforcement has failed. And implementing current approaches, it is possible. For example, adaptive management. That means not to come with the management of the environment, so-called blueprint. That means having a management plan for 10 years, and after 10 years to see what has happened, but really to manage the nature and the environment as based on the lesson learned, immediately change the measures according to the situation to be much more dynamic, or using early warning systems. We have now quite good development in this part of the activities within the environment protection, or to seek. This is something which is very popular in the US, which is called ecosystem integrity. This is a basic main idea for all federal authorities dealing with the environment in the US. And the idea is very simple. The most integrated ecosystem is ecosystems which is as close as possible to the natural state of the play. And also a risk hazard management, very developing, namely in relation to the climate change. And use the post-normal science, for example, scenario analysis. This is not mathematical model. This is not something like prognosis, but scenario analysis. That means that you will come with some scenarios of the future, saying the best scenario, worst scenario, and most probably scenario, or business as usual. There is some scheme of the adaptive management. Let me finish with the words of this very wise man who said, "Look deep into nature, and then you will understand everything better." And you know, my director always said, your lectures and presentations are always very pessimistic. So I have used to finish all my presentation with this photo. I took it on the Cape of the Good Hope in South Africa, and hoping that we can help you and you can help us with the environmental law enforcement. Special thanks from me and my cameleon. Thank you very much.
Jan, thank you. I suggest that we invite our next speaker, Oleksandr Skakalsky, to deliver his remarks, and then we will do a Q&A session with the speakers. And with that, I give the floor to Oleksandr Skakalsky. He is the representative of Ukrainian Environmental Inspectorate. Oleksandr Skakalsky has experience working with our Ukrainian Environmental Inspectorate. Good morning, colleagues. First and foremost, I would like to thank the previous speaker, Mr. Jan Plesnik. Many insights were there in your lecture. So you started from the general things and you moved to more specific aspects which are important. I absolutely second your ideas, especially the recommendations given by Mr. Plesnik. I totally agree with all of that, because you outlined the tools that enhance and strengthen the activities of Ukrainian Environmental Inspectorate, or any inspectorate in any country for that matter as well. So I have some experience in working with the Ukrainian Environmental Inspectorate. This is true, but I would also like to say that it just so happened that I was working in the field of environmental protection and with the environment generally. I was working in a company because I was the environmental protection engineer. And I also worked in the regional offices of the ministry. I was working for a regional authority in the Department of the Environment. And I was doing environmental audit under the guidance of Grigory Shmatkov. And I also worked in the local self-government in the field of environmental protection. And for some time, I was a part of the NGO sector. Even that is on my bio. So when I was working in the State Environmental Inspectorate, and by then I had already had some extensive experience, and that part of my life was one of the most engaging stages in my professional development and in life in general. This work is very interesting. One might think working in the state supervision is a rigid role, but there is some space for being creative, and there are ways for you to apply your agility of mind if you're willing to do that. So yeah, Jan outlined some cons or some flaws or deficiencies, and it's my understanding that it's something that the Czech Environmental Inspectorate had at a certain point in time as it was developing. Therefore, I believe we had and we have similar problematic areas in Ukraine in the Environmental Inspectorate. If we have here with us representatives of the Ukrainian Environmental Inspectorate, they might provide an update on how things stand at the moment. But my talk will be based on things that I observed when I was working there.
Well, of course, the challenges are pretty similar. Corruption, I'm not gonna talk about it in detail because this problem is something that many public authorities are faced with, regardless of whether those who are drafting policies or implementing it. This is a national challenge. And of course, we should not keep quiet about it, because it creates an obstacle for development of any system, especially when it comes to the state oversight system, as the corruption risks are pretty high compared to other areas. Also, political impact and influence. Aside from that, if we are talking about overseeing the representatives of big business who are influential either at the regional or national level. Among the main ones, and probably these things are interrelated, corruption and other important things. One of them is the lack of funding. Because funding, well, back when I used to work there, the salary or the wage of the staff of the Environmental Inspectorate was 10, 11, 13,000 Ukrainian hryvnia. You can do the math to check how much that is in USD or in euros, and you will understand how little that is. That is about 250 to 300 USD. And with that level of salary, you cannot expect that professionals will be coming to work for the Environmental Inspectorate. And back then, when I used to work there, well, you know, it's thanks to their perseverance. Their love for this profession is what led them stay there and not quit that job, to not look for something with a better pay. That is what is important. And Jan mentioned that up to a certain point in time, the inspectorate in the Czech Republic was, among other things, also funded by the money coming from the fines and other sanctions collected. But from what I understand, there was a negative backlash from the society. But I think that this modus operandi and this source of funding seems to be pretty interesting to consider. Something that could also be of interest to the enforcement agency, so that they are more independent, so that they don't have to rely on the external funding as much. And clearly, you need to set very strict requirements on how this funding can be used. We currently, for example, have the similar situation with the money collected as a result of fines and tax end up in the local and state budgets, and it says what you can spend it on. So maybe this negative assessment and evaluation, that you know that the inspectorates are putting that in their own pocket, maybe that will allow you to cancel it out. But the idea actually sounds pretty interesting. What else can I mention, relying on my experience? The society's negative attitude, and especially the civil society organization sector, due to the lack of communication. And I remember how crucial it was for me while I was the head of the department to properly communicate with people, organize multiple roundtables, meetings, try to communicate using various avenues so that public, and namely active civil society organizations, could feel that we're open for the dialogue, that there is nothing that we're trying to hide from them. Well, of course, we didn't want them to speculate. We didn't want them to be subjective. But I agree that we need to regulate the work in this sector, because the public's attitude to a specific agency or an inspection matters, because trust or the lack thereof has a direct impact on the efficiency of work done, among other things. And you know, I believe that you need to do the service to better understand what needs to be changed in the work of a certain agency. So I fully second that. Of course, another thing that I would like to cover is the outdated equipment, outdated methodology when it comes to overseeing the situation with the atmospheric air or soils. Because what am I getting at? All the methodologies that currently are used by the inspectorate were created at the previous stage, or when the previous monitoring methodology was developed. Currently, there are other approaches, such as using satellite imagery, etc. All of that became accessible. And not using these approaches while we are carrying out our responsibilities is inefficient. We cannot only rely on traditional approaches and methods. And I do understand that there is already some experience in applying certain methodologies, but let us not be scared of that. Let us move into the future. Again, I'm talking about the satellite imagery. You can use the drones and other modern equipment which will improve the control and oversight. Another thing, talking about the international cooperation. Back when I used to work for the inspectorate, I wanted to have proper international cooperation, but sadly, we did not implement everything that we were thinking about. But I know that currently the State Environmental Inspectorate also joined the European Network on Implementation of the Environmental Law. It is called IMPEL. And it is amazing because this international cooperation learning from others' experience is a very good thing. You know, I always was a strong supporter of not inventing the wheel. It is an ungrateful endeavor. You know, say, let's take the Czech Republic. If they have experience, if they have successful experience, say we looked at the publication, they also had some pitfalls. And they had to walk a long path to analyze the negative experience and to change the system and to create something more effective. Probably not perfect, but at least something that has a qualitative difference as opposed to what it used to be before. So once again, I'm a strong supporter. I'm not saying that we need to copy paste somebody else's model, be it the Czech model or some other model, be it the US model, but we should at the very least take a look at the other's experience to first use it to overcome all of the pitfalls, and secondly, to build a new oversight system. When I used to work for the State Environmental Inspectorate, we used to say that we were trying to develop smart control, smart inspection. And I understand that the principles that lay the groundwork for the state control and oversight also requires avoiding corruption-related risks and requires applying some patterns. And you probably are aware that there is a unified form of the inspection. It looks like a checklist. You know, you have to tick the boxes, and it gives you less space for describing the violations and justifying them. I understand this approach, but based on my experience, when you're checking some huge metallurgic enterprise in Kryvorizka, the checklists are not that useful because you have to look at the technology, at the process, you have to describe it, you have to detect the problems in their operation, the turnover of materials, the inputs and outputs of materials. So the good quality inspection can be carried out only if A, you have qualified professionals working in the inspectorate, not only in terms of their knowledge of the environmental legislation, but also understanding of the technological side of things, and B, the state-of-the-art methodologies using the drones, etc., so that you don't have to go there with a ruler to see what has been polluted, but instead use something that is state-of-the-art. We managed to improve some things while I worked for the inspectorate, but you know, I am a strong supporter of the following, as Jan mentioned, that in the US, the agency that is responsible for environment also does research, also has the technical experts. So, you know, the research component, the scientific research component, or like semi-scientific research component, in my opinion, should be part and parcel of the state inspection measures. Another issue is that currently the State Environmental Inspectorate also sometimes has to resort to court. Also, there can be some complaints that are submitted to the enterprises in case they are polluting the environment. And oftentimes, it forces the state environmental inspectorates to go to the court and, using the court procedure, get the fees and fines. And when it ends up in the court, this creates another issue because, again, large enterprises have large financial resources. That is why they can engage good law firms. They can engage the legal experts from the outside. And for those who are aware of how the legal system works, you probably know what I'm talking about. Because this judiciary procedure is very complex. It takes up a lot of time. And due to the fact that the well-paid lawyers that the enterprises hire, oftentimes the State Environmental Inspectorate does not get any results, even despite the court hearings. Yes, the inspectorate might be right, but there are some imperfections that the lawyers hired by the enterprise can rely on. And that is why the inspectorate cannot do anything about the complaints when it comes to a specific enterprise. And this is another important thing. If we're talking about financial resources for the activities of inspectorate, and I'm not only talking about increasing the salaries and wages of the inspectors, it also covers the state-of-the-art technology. And again, outsourcing legal firms to defend the interests of the inspectorate in the courts. And this probably could also come in handy. Once again, all the things that pertain to, well, clearly, the first stage is the institutional level. We're talking about creating efficient legislation as a platform for further improvement, as well as increasing the fines, funding, awareness raising, qualification of the staff. I just noted down some things that Jan mentioned. Adaptive management, all of these things are the steps that need to be taken to improve the work of the State Environmental Inspectorate. This is what I wanted to achieve back in the day when I used to work there. And I was really glad when I saw improvements in the operation of the Environmental Inspectorate, even though I'm not working for them anymore. Because Inspectorate should be an assistant for the local government authorities. And again, efficient cooperation between me and head of the territorial authority, or I don't know, maybe some interregional bodies, is mutually beneficial. And it can pay off. Well, this is it from me for now. Thank you, Oleksandr. Well, then we can move on to the Q&A session because we promised that we have to be done by 1 p.m. There was a question about the number of the environmental inspectors, and the response was that the total is 546. Professional staff is 421. High-level management is 17 people, and supporting staff is 108 people. If anyone else has any questions and you're willing to unmute yourself, please raise your hand. We're going to give you the floor. And in the meantime, I'm going to mention some questions that you have submitted when registering. There was a question from Ihor. A question to Jan. What mechanism of work with the registry of industrial pollution in accordance with the EU directive?
Yes, if I may, it was one of the really issue where a special attention was paid by the Commission. That means that the register has been there, and I would like to say that it is relatively complete and rich with the information, of course, but at the same time, I would like to say the fact that this is not only the issue of Czech Environmental Inspectorate, but also there is strong support from the regional authorities, because in my country there are 14 regions, and there are also public or state administration authorities in this. That means that we have also, as it was mentioned, collaboration between not only let me say people dealing with this issue in Prague, but there is a lot of information updating and so on, just from the region, both from the regional authorities or the regional branches of the inspectorate.
Thank you. Another question to you, Jan, I think. Are there any training courses on environmental management, something that have to do with the European management approach?
Yes, there are there have been the courses, training courses, because this is very important with respect of the expert and knowledge, because you know that really as it was mentioned by the in the highly informative presentation of the previous speaker, these inspectors should be really expert in this. And for example, because we have been facing the issue that there are some fakes, or for example, when with respect of the wildlife crime, if there is the possibility to go to the keepers, you should be very well trained, because of, for example, we have a special rules that the Czech Environment Inspectorate has to identify the species. That means that, for example, the inspector should really identify species in some deadline and so on, and that means that in my opinion, and what is very important is that not only to be trained with respect of the patterns and the legal issues which are in the European Union, but what was very important for the inspectorate was that there was a training. For example, there was simulation of the procedure under the curd. That means, because I can imagine that there are some people which are for the first time under the curd, and now they are under pressure to come with the information, with the evidence. And so we have used to train the inspectors to be prepared that there will be, for example, strong pressure from the attorney who is in charge of defense of people or so on. And this was also very important. And again, I would like to highlight the fact that not only Impel, but we have quite good cooperation also with the part of the Interpol dealing with the environmental crime, and also with respect of the sharing the information on the possible breaking of the law, but also based on the experience. And the training is really very important, and therefore again let me stress the fact that the salary is very important, because these persons, these inspectors in the fields are very much threatened by various dangers, and they should be psychological very strong. And these are really, and I can imagine that in your country is the situation similar, and apologize being for probably really expressive, like these are really heroes in the environment protection if they are doing their job very well.
Jan, thank you. Yes, the situation is equally dangerous here in Ukraine, not only because of the Russians' missiles. Question: did the Kryvyi Rih get the funding, approximately 10 million hryvnias, when the company ArcelorMittal was polluting the air? If the fine was received, how was this used? This is a question to Oleksandr. Answer: yes, Alexandra, indeed. We conducted check after the incident taking place. There was an emergency in a production company near the city of Kryvyi Rih in Ukraine. State environmental inspectors were accessed the premises. We have accrued the damages, and this is an example that I gave. The company, for some reason, decided not to complain, and the company voluntarily paid a total of 10 million Ukrainian hryvnias. This is in line with the law. This is the fine stipulated by the law, and 50% of the fines goes to the local environmental fund. The fund has received these amounts, but we have painfully witnessed the cases where the company Arcelor Kryvyi Rih declared that they were paying the fine at first, but then they appealed this decision in court and they were refunded as a company. So we decided to wait at first. Then we made sure that the private company will not sue us. And for the next year, we're planning to account for this amount in the overall account of the environmental fund. We will spend it for the general measures. I think we will plant some green areas in the city. Yuri, please wait for the speaker to finish. If you have a burning question, wait for the previous people to finish. Alexandra, yes, I'll continue. So we will use those funds to renovate the water pipes and to improve the environmental monitoring system. An effort is on the way to design a facility for solid waste recycling, and all of that is funded by the local environmental fund. Ruslan, you raised your hand. Please ask your question. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you. I have a question for Jan. I was wondering, for the Czech law enforcement bodies, how do you conduct the inspections? For example, I recently had an honor to visit my Czech counterparts in the national park. They said that the inspectors check just the documents, or the inspectors goes to the forest, for example. They look at the trees, at the stumps and the logs. The Czech colleagues said that this is not happening. Jan, so a question to you, how does the inspection happens in the field?
Yes, I can say that we should really distinguish between the national parks, territories, and special protected areas where the administration is in charge of it, and not speaking about the non-protected landscape. but really the field activities are or measures in the field are a very important part. I don't know which part of the country you visited, but if you will go through the reports of the Czech Environment Inspectorate, there are hundreds of visits of the both natural and legal persons, where there is some information about the breaking the law. But of course, as I mentioned, the inspectorate is highly understaffed, and this is the problem. But if you will go to the, for example, what was now done by the Czech Environment Inspectorate and the Nature Conservation Agency of the Czech Republic recently, last and this year, we checked all runoffs to the waters, all runoffs. Thousands of the runoffs to the water was personally checked to be sure whether there is the contamination or not. But it was because this horrible disaster on the Bečva River. But this was a real issue, and we even dedicated in the agency 20 persons in the field checking the possible water contamination sources. That means that these guys are definitely not doing with the stamps and the documents. But I'm sure that you can, you really, that you met the situation, because really there is a huge amount of task and only few people who are dealing with this. But it is, I guess, very common to every inspectorate in the world.
If I may, sorry, just a quick question. I used to work in the state environmental inspection in the regional branch. I mostly did nature protection. So when you calculate the damages, the methodology in the Czech Republic, do you account for? Well, I think what we account for is just the economic component, but not the environmental component. For example, they chop down some wood, they look at the diameter of the stump, and they use the feed depending on the diameter. What about the Czech Republic? What's the method for calculation? If you cut down 20 trees, you calculate the loss of oxygen in the X amount, or you calculate the damage because of the reduced habitats of certain species. So what's the methodology in the Czech Republic? Thank you.
Yeah, I can say that the methodology with respect of the forest damage has been quite developed, because there is a really well-known school at the Mendel University in Brno, which is dealing both with the timber and not timber products, as well as with the ecosystem services approach. That means that, for example, you know that in the early 1990s, there were processes which were called land redistribution and land privatization. And land redistribution was the process when you received, because of your predecessor, you received the land. And the problem was that the land was brought back to some elder people in the countryside, and there were some gangs of people who came to the such persons and asked them, please, you know, there are some strict rules how to manage forest, and we are going to do it instead of you. Please undersign this. And then they come and they they were felling down, they were cutting down the trees and disappeared. And it was quite massive in the, let me say, early 1990s. But the inspectorate was able really to find some people dealing this crime. And when there was occurred, we asked to be as a part of the fine, not only the price of the timber or possible timber products, but also these functions, non-productive function of forest. And there was special, let me say, catalog of the services, ecosystem services provided by the forest. And this was very nice. And the fine or the punishment for this person breaking the law was not only because of timber, but also because of oxygen production, because of the role of the trees with respect of microclimate, with respect of providing habitats, and all this issue. And I would like also very much appreciate, because you know that the problem was that these persons really cutting the forest were so quick, and but we at the time asked our French colleagues, and they were able to provide us immediately with the what was mentioned by the previous speakers, with the satellite imageries. So the inspector was was able to be very quickly at the site, and it helped us very much. That means that this is one issue, but it was because we were prepared. There was quite strong methodology how to calculate by the individual check around the non-productive function of forest, even in the very small forest growth or stands.
Thank you, Jan. We have so many questions. Yuri Spodin wanted to say something. Yuri, over to you. A question to Oleksandr following his remarks. What I liked is that funding is searched to provide the salaries for the professionals. You know, fines are good, but we know, based on our experience, we know that our activities have significant economic effect. I have a number of suggestions. I have been working in the Environmental Inspectorate and in the sanitary supervision body. So I think that my activities generated $631. I have specific suggestions and ideas that I don't have the time to voice. Now, when it comes to public relations, at a certain point we participated in the work of an NGO. The NGO was doing the public relations. What Oleksandr said about studying the technology, not just reprimanding people, but getting to the bottom of what technology is being used, I think this is the most precious thing that I've heard from him. Getting to the bottom of the technological processes and then provide suggestions is the most valuable and the most significant activities that we can do for us and for our country. Now, when it comes to environmental crimes and responsibility, let me say a number of remarks. Environmental crime begins when, well, I've seen it firsthand. The crime begins from the moment of technical design of the facility. Whenever a facility is designed, environmental crimes might be committed. For example, there was a factory and they wanted to locate the power plant in the so-called sanitary area of the factory. We cooperated with the Ministry of Health, and that facility was worth $18 million. And during the construction, there was another environmental crime. For example, they built the factory, they had to burn the gases that were going out of the factory, but the calculations showed that they need not 5 furnaces but 3 furnaces to burn the gases, but in the end they just ended up, all the gases ended up in the atmosphere, and they had to build an additional furnace facility instead of that. They just burnt it, but our suggestion gave way to the emergence of the furnace facility for processing these gases. Yuri, we apologize. We have no time for your remarks. I know you're a representative of an NGO, but we have no time to listen to all the cases that you have to tell us, and this is an example how an NGO can impact the mechanisms and make sure that the companies comply with the law. Did I understand the main idea of your speech correctly, Yuri?
Well, Yuri has already muted himself well. Yeah, and I think this is going to be the final question for today by Ina Kotovska. She would like to hear your take. What does environmental consciousness of people depend on when it comes to the environment preservation? Because based on multiple studies, it is known that people in European countries care for environment as something very dear to them. But in Ukraine, sadly, people oftentimes ignore it. So the question is, does it depend on the mindset or maybe big fines, or maybe it depends on the economic motivation? Jan?
If I may, I guess that this is also the issue I would like to give to you the example from my country. You know, just after the Velvet Revolution in February 1990, there was a poll carried out by the Institute of Sociology of the Czechoslovak Academy of Science at the time, and they asked people, what is the most important for your life? And the very first and the most important in this ranking was freedom, and there was the environment quality. And when they repeated it 10 years later, the environment protection was on the 7th rank, because people have been facing really problems like new jobs, new style of living, or so on. But what I would like to stress is all of us that, and apologize because it is based on the very nice study which was published some years ago by Greenpeace, and they in the fact were seeking for they put together 200 of the most successful stories in the environmental protection across the planet, and they were seeking for the common nominator. What is common? Whether it is that these extremely successful stories were because, for example, it was in rich countries, or because it was that the topic was wildlife because people like animals and flowers and so on, or it was because it was well prepared. And then finally, found the only common denominator. And this was that all these stories were so successful because those who have been involved, stakeholders, really all people who were involved, or all people which were influenced by these stories, were in the fact involved, and they consider these activities not something coming from Prague or Brussels, but something which is in their interest and which can help them, and they should be involved in it. And this is something which scientists called participatory approach, to be involved in decision-making process, but also, because we are only humans, to be involved in sharing the benefits. And this is very important issue. But all of us, it will be the issue that we should take into account that there was break when comparing us with the United Kingdom or the Netherlands or the Nordic countries, with the public involvement and public support to the environmental issues. Yeah, because really there is strong tradition. But what we can do, and to be honest, in my country, we are not so good as a government with the education and public awareness, but there is a lot of NGOs helping us, and to really to show the people again that this is something in the best sense of the word public interest. I know that this is not easy. This is a long time run, a run for a long distance, but we should start, we should begin with this.
Okay, thank you, Jan. I will take over the moderation a little bit because our colleague Sasha was disconnected due to the electricity graphicon. So I will take also the opportunity to say a few last words. First of all, I would like to say big thanks to both of the speakers. It was an amazing discussion, and for me as a Czech person, I learned myself a lot about the Czech environmental conservation, and it was great also for me personally to hear, Oleksandr, your story and your experience and your views on the inspections. I would like to say that, and I really hope that this is some kind of beginning of the discussion. As I have mentioned, Arnika is active in Ukraine for a long time, and we certainly plan to stay for many more years if possible. And the Environmental Inspectorate is one of the topics which we certainly want to pay attention. I will repeat one more thing. All of you will receive the presentation from Jan. You will receive a link to the recording. And if you have any specific questions, you can send it by email to us, and if possible, we will try to somehow facilitate the answers. And we are looking forward for any feedback, any ideas for future cooperation, or just to know your opinion on our work. So once again, thank you all. Take care, keep safe, and razom do peremohy.
Thank you, and crossing the fingers.
Bye. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Bye. Thank you. Bye.